The lab was quiet, except for the faint hum of machinery. Dr. Leo Hayes, a physicist with an obsession for the unknown, stood in front of the enormous screen, eyes wide as he scanned through the data. For months, he had been searching for an anomaly, something that didn't fit with the laws of physics as they understood them. What he found was more than a breakthrough. It was a revelation. The readings didn't just hint at parallel universes, they screamed it. As Dr. Hayes reviewed the data again, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He had always believed that the multiverse was a theory, an abstract concept discussed only in the most speculative corners of physics. But now, it was staring him in the face. The evidence was undeniable. There was a tear in the fabric of reality, a bridge between worlds, one that he could never have imagined. But the question was, what lay beyond that tear? He hesitated, glancing at the empty lab around him. He knew this discovery would change everything. But was he ready to face what lay beyond the veil? The next morning, Dr. Hayes could hardly sleep. His mind raced, turning over the discovery, questioning its implications. He walked into the university auditorium, holding his findings in a printed report, ready to present it to his colleagues. But as he stood in front of them, something caught in his throat. He wasn't sure how to begin. This isn't just theory anymore, he said, his voice shaky. The multiverse, the idea that multiple universes exist beyond our own, is real. And I have proof. There was a moment of stunned silence. Some of his colleagues exchanged doubtful glances while others looked intrigued. Dr. Hayes continued, his voice gaining strength. I found a breach, a rift between universes. It's not just possible. It's happening. The room buzzed with chatter, but one thing was clear. His colleagues didn't believe him. The skepticism was written on their faces, and Dr. Hayes knew that this was just the beginning. But the question still lingered. What came next? If the multiverse was real, what did that mean for humanity's place in the cosmos? As the weeks passed, Dr. Hayes worked tirelessly to gather more evidence, obsessively running experiments and simulations. He had created a sophisticated device, a machine capable of observing the rift he had detected. One evening, as he powered up the machine, the lab seemed to hum with energy. Dr. Hayes watched as the monitor flickered, displaying a series of lines that rapidly shifted in frequency. The rift was widening. The numbers on the screen danced erratically, and for a moment, everything went silent. And then, on the screen, a figure appeared. It wasn't just an anomaly. It was a silhouette of something otherworldly. A figure, a being from beyond, staring back at him. Dr. Hayes froze, his heart pounding. He couldn't move. The machine was capturing something far more than just data. It was capturing a living entity. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. The multiverse was not just a theory. It was a reality. And they weren't alone. Days later, Dr. Hayes sat in his office, unable to shake the image of the figure from the rift. He had tried to make contact, but all efforts to communicate had failed. The presence on the other side was real, but it was distant, unreachable. He couldn't explain how, but Dr. Hayes knew that whatever was beyond the rift had been observing them as much as they had observed it. Was it hostile? Friendly? Or something entirely different? The unknown terrified him, but at the same time, it exhilarated him. He called a private meeting with his trusted colleague, Dr. Maria Voss, hoping for some answers. We're not just studying the multiverse, Dr. Hayes said, leaning forward, his voice low. We found something. Someone. And I think it's watching us. Dr. Voss frowned, clearly troubled. We need to be careful, she said. Whatever's out there, we don't know what it wants, or if it even understands us. Dr. Hayes nodded, but deep down he knew one thing for certain. They couldn't turn back now. The journey into the multiverse had begun. As the discovery of the rift became known to a few select members of the scientific community, the pressure to understand it grew. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss were now part of a secret research group, tasked with further investigating the breach. But as the rift grew stronger, so did the strange phenomena surrounding it. Unexplained fluctuations in time, Visions of distant places and glimpses of alternate realities began to affect everyone involved. One night, while running a routine scan of the rift, Dr. Hayes noticed something strange. The rift was pulsing, as if it were alive, and the patterns were shifting in ways he had never seen before. Suddenly a voice crackled through the lab's intercom system, breaking the silence. "You are not alone." The words echoed in the room, and Dr. Hayes's heart skipped a beat. The rift wasn't just a portal, it was a connection, one that reached beyond space and time. And whatever lay beyond the rift was reaching out. The following days were a blur of intense research, but Dr. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every experiment, every calculation seemed to lead back to one singular truth: the rift was growing. What had started as a small anomaly was now spreading, altering the fabric of space-time around it. Dr. Voss had noticed it too. "It's like it's alive, Leo," she said one night, her voice tense as they studied the data together. "This isn't just a rift between universes. It's a living, breathing entity." They both stared at the monitor, watching the rift pulse like a heartbeat. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying. "We need to know more about what's on the other side," Dr. Hayes said quietly, more to himself than to her. The unknown was no longer something to be feared. It was something they had to understand. The question was, how far were they willing to go to uncover the secrets of the multiverse? As the days passed, strange occurrences began to happen. The rift wasn't just expanding, it was interacting with the world around it. The air in the lab became thick, almost electric. Objects shifted, and strange patterns appeared in the lab's equipment, as if the rift was reaching out, attempting to communicate. One afternoon, while Dr. Voss was conducting an experiment near the rift, a sudden flash of light filled the room, and a low hum vibrated through the walls. Dr. Hayes rushed to her side, but before he could ask what had happened, the air shimmered. A voice, deep and otherworldly, whispered through the lab's intercom. "You are not ready." The words echoed, reverberating in Dr. Hayes' mind. "I'm well, It was the same message they had heard before, but this time it felt like a warning, not a greeting. The voice had haunted Dr. Hayes for days. "You are not ready." The words kept repeating in his mind like a mantra, drowning out everything else. What did it mean? And more importantly, who, or what, had spoken those words? He couldn't let it go, couldn't allow the unknown to remain a threat. With Dr. Voss's help, Dr. Hayes started working on a plan to send a signal through the rift, a way to communicate with whatever was on the other side. What? They built a specialized device, one capable of sending both electromagnetic and quantum signals to breach the rift. It was dangerous, he knew that. But Dr. Hayes wasn't afraid anymore. They had to know what lay beyond, even if it meant risking everything. As they powered up the device, the rift began to pulse violently. This time, it wasn't just a fluctuation. It was a response. And it was coming from the other side. When the device was finally activated, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss watched the monitor intently. The machine emitted a low hum, and the rift pulsed once more. Then, without warning, the screen flickered, and a strange image appeared, something neither of them could have expected. The image was distorted at first, but as it solidified, they saw a vast landscape unlike any earthly terrain. The sky was a swirling mixture of colors, and the ground was made of liquid light. Figures moved across the landscape, beings whose forms were difficult to comprehend, shifting between shapes, made of pure energy. Dr. Hayes took a step back, stunned. "It's alive," he whispered. The beings on the other side weren't just observing, they were aware, and they were looking back at them. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Voss said, her voice trembling. Dr. Hayes wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. The weeks following the discovery were a whirlwind of emotions. The images they had seen, the beings on the other side of the rift, haunted Dr. Hayes. They weren't just a theory anymore. They were real. And somehow, they were aware of Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss. The rift had become more than a scientific anomaly. It had become a gateway to something far beyond their understanding. As Dr. Hayes lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, he realized something profound. The multiverse wasn't just beyond them. It was watching them. And if the multiverse had consciousness, what else could it be? Was there more at play here than simple physics? Was this a message? Or a warning? He didn't know, but the fear was starting to outweigh his excitement. They had tapped into something far bigger than they were prepared for. It had been several days since they had sent the signal through the rift, and neither Dr. Hayes nor Dr. Voss had been able to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The beings on the other side seemed to know they were there. Each day the rift grew more active, its pulsing rhythm becoming more erratic. Then one evening, as Dr. Hayes was running another set of experiments, something changed. The hum of the rift intensified, and a deep vibration shook the lab. Dr. Voss rushed to his side, looking at the screens. "It's not just reacting, it's responding," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. Before they could react, the rift expanded momentarily, creating a shimmering doorway, a window into the other universe. A figure stepped through, materializing into the lab, an entity made entirely of shifting, glowing energy. It moved with purpose, its form both alien and beautiful. Dr. Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. They had opened the door, and now something had crossed over. The entity stood motionless for a moment, its form flickering like a mirage. It seemed to study them, its presence overwhelming. Dr. Hayes took a step forward, heart pounding in his chest. "Are you?" he began, but the words caught in his throat. The entity's shimmering form pulsed, and suddenly, a voice, not like any voice they had ever heard before, echoed through the lab, reverberating in their minds. "We are beyond your understanding," it said, its tone neither malevolent nor kind, but neutral. "The rift you have opened was not meant for you, yet you have crossed the threshold." Dr. Voss stood frozen, eyes wide. "What do you want?" she whispered. The entity's form shifted slightly, its energy vibrating. "We seek knowledge as you do, but not all questions are meant to be answered." The silence that followed was deafening, and Dr. Hayes couldn't help but wonder if they had made a mistake. Had they truly invited something into their world they couldn't control? For hours, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss tried to communicate with the entity. They asked questions, hoping for some insight, some way to understand the purpose of the rift and the being standing before them. But the entity's answers were cryptic, evasive. "The multiverse is infinite beyond comprehension," it explained. "Each universe is a thread, woven into the fabric of existence. Your world is but one." Dr. Hayes felt a growing frustration. He had opened the rift for answers, but all he was getting was more mystery. "Why are you here?" Dr. Hayes asked, his voice strained. The entity paused, its energy pulsating in waves. "You sought to understand, but you cannot control what you do not fully understand," it responded, its voice now more resonant, echoing in the lab. "You have opened a door, but there are others who will notice. Be ready." With those final words, the entity turned, its form shifting into the rift and disappearing as quickly as it had arrived. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss were left standing in the silence, their minds racing with more questions than ever. Days later, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss began to notice strange occurrences. Objects in the lab would shift on their own, lights flickered without explanation, and there were strange anomalies in their data. It was as if the fabric of reality itself was becoming unstable. One evening, while running diagnostics, Dr. Hayes noticed a sudden drop in the power grid. The rift wasn't just an observation. It was beginning to affect their world. The walls of the lab seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and the air itself felt thick, almost alive. Then, as if on cue, another figure appeared in the lab. But this time, it wasn't the same entity. This being was darker, its form made of swirling shadows, like a living void. "You have opened the door," it said, its voice low and hollow. "And now you must answer for it." The dark entity moved closer, its form shifting with each step it took. Dr. Hayes stood frozen, heart racing. What do you want? He demanded, trying to summon the courage to speak. The entity's voice echoed in his mind, sending a chill through his spine. You have opened a path that should not be walked. Now, there are others who will come. They will seek to take what is yours, what you have uncovered. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her voice trembling. Who are they? The entity's form flickered, its energy intensifying. They are the ones who understand the price of knowledge. And they will not be kind. With that, the entity faded, leaving Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss alone in the lab, the weight of its warning hanging in the air. They knew then, what they had uncovered was more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And they were not the only ones aware of it. It had been weeks since the Dark Entity's warning, and Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss had been working non-stop to understand the full scope of what they had unleashed. The rift continued to pulse erratically, its fluctuations growing more unpredictable. As Dr. Hayes sat in the lab, staring at the latest data, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had triggered something they were never meant to. The entities were still coming, each one more powerful and cryptic than the last. Dr. Voss had been the one to notice it first. There's something wrong, she said, her voice sharp with concern. Dr. Hayes turned to her, his expression tense. What do you mean? The rift, it's not just affecting our world anymore. The other universes, they're bleeding into ours. This isn't just a doorway anymore. It's becoming a tear in the fabric of reality. Dr. Hayes swallowed hard. The truth was sinking in, the multiverse was collapsing, and they had no idea how to stop it. The days following Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss's realization were filled with frantic research and failed attempts to stabilize the rift. It wasn't just the instability of the rift that worried them, it was the things that were starting to emerge. One evening, as the two of them sat reviewing the data, a faint sound echoed from the rift. It was a low, almost imperceptible hum, but it grew louder by the second. Dr. Hayes glanced at Dr. Voss, who looked equally uneasy. We're not alone, Dr. Hayes whispered. Suddenly, the rift flared, and for a moment, the room was flooded with a brilliant, blinding light. When it cleared, a creature stood in the center of the lab, a massive, shifting figure made of swirling dark matter. Its eyes were two burning orbs of energy, staring directly at them. You have opened a gate, it said, its voice a deep, reverberating echo. And now, there will be consequences. The creature's presence was overwhelming. Dr. Hayes couldn't move. He was frozen in place, staring at the being that had emerged from the rift. What do you want? Dr. Voss demanded, her voice shaking. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if considering her question. We seek balance, it said, its voice like thunder rumbling through the room. You have disrupted the order of existence. Now you must restore it, or face the consequences. The warning was clear, and for the first time Dr. Hayes felt true fear. How do we restore balance? Dr. Hayes asked, his voice barely a whisper. The creature's form flickered, its energy shifting. You must close the rift, but doing so will require a sacrifice. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss exchanged looks, both of them realizing the magnitude of the choice they now faced. Could they close the rift without destroying everything? Could they even survive the consequences of their actions? After the creature's warning, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss worked tirelessly to understand the means of closing the rift. The creature had mentioned a sacrifice, but neither of them was willing to contemplate what that might mean. They spent days researching, trying to find a way to reverse the damage without losing everything they had worked for. Finally, after hours of data analysis, Dr. Voss made a chilling discovery. The only way to close the rift was to redirect the energy back into itself, essentially, to overload it. But doing so would likely cause a massive energy release, destroying the lab, and possibly the surrounding area. We're running out of time, Dr. Voss said, her voice tense. If we don't act now, the rift will expand beyond our control. Dr. Hayes looked at her, a determined expression on his face. We don't have a choice. We have to do this. And so they began setting up the equipment for the final procedure, unsure if they would succeed or if they would become part of the very fabric they had been studying. As they initiated the process, the rift began to pulse more violently than ever before. The walls of the lab shook, and the hum of the rift grew to a deafening roar. Dr. Hayes watched the energy readings closely, knowing they were at the tipping point. "It's working," Dr. Voss shouted over the noise, but her voice was drowned out by the rising storm. The ground beneath them trembled as the rift's energy surged, and for a moment Dr. Hayes thought they had failed. But then, with a flash of light, the rift began to close, its violent energy dissipating into the air. The lab fell silent, the rift now a faint, fading glow. Dr. Hayes collapsed into a chair, exhausted but relieved. They had done it. Or so they thought. As Dr. Voss turned to check the monitors, she froze. "It's not over," she whispered. "The rift. It's closing, but there's something else. Something's still out there." The lab had fallen eerily silent after the rift's closure. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss were exhausted, their minds still reeling from the events of the past few weeks. They had closed the rift, but the weight of what they had uncovered, the entities, the consequences, still lingered. Dr. Voss was the first to speak. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, her voice quiet. Dr. Hayes didn't have an answer. The rift was gone, but the impact of their actions remained. They had opened a door to another universe, something beyond human understanding, and the cost had been greater than they had anticipated. But Dr. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. Something still lurked in the shadows, waiting to emerge. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. "We had no choice. We did what we had to do," he said, though the words felt hollow. Deep down, Dr. Hayes knew that the multiverse was not done with them. The cost of knowledge was greater than they had ever imagined, and there would be a price to pay. In the weeks following the closure of the rift, the world outside seemed to go on as normal. But Dr. Hayes could feel the cracks in reality growing wider. Strange occurrences were reported around the globe. Distortions in space-time, people experiencing glimpses of alternate realities, and moments when the laws of physics seemed to break down. Dr. Hayes couldn't help but feel responsible. The rift was gone, but its effects were far from over. One evening, while reviewing the latest data, Dr. Voss came to him with a report. "You're right," she said, her voice tense. "It's spreading, the anomalies are increasing, and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg." Dr. Hayes stared at the screen in front of him. The multiverse was reacting, and they were at the center of it. The rift had been a doorway, but now it seemed like they had opened a floodgate. "We need to find a way to contain it," he said, though he knew it was no longer just a matter of science. They were dealing with forces beyond their control. Determined to find a solution, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss worked tirelessly, researching ancient texts, quantum theories, and any other clue that might help them understand what they had unleashed. One night, while scanning through a series of old documents, Dr. Voss came across something that caught her attention. This could be it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "There's a theory, a way to close the breach for good, but it requires a unique form of energy, a kind of focused quantum resonance." Dr. Hayes was skeptical but intrigued. "But we don't have the resources for something like that. How do we even begin to harness that kind of power?" Dr. Voss shook her head, the excitement in her eyes fading. "We don't, but someone else might." The realization hit Dr. Hayes like a punch to the gut. They weren't the only ones who had been monitoring the rift. Someone or something had been watching them, and they weren't going to let them close it without consequences. The following days were filled with a growing sense of unease. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss knew they had to act quickly, but there was a nagging feeling that they were being watched. The signs were subtle at first: unexplained disturbances in the lab, the feeling of being followed, and strange figures appearing on the periphery of their vision. One evening, as they were preparing the final calculations, the lab's lights flickered, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Dr. Hayes froze, sensing something was wrong. "It's them," Dr. Voss whispered. Before they could react, the rift flared to life again, but this time it wasn't just a rift, it was a portal. Figures, humanoid but twisted, emerged from the glowing vortex. They were beings of pure energy, their forms constantly shifting and flickering. "You have gone too far," one of them said, its voice a low hum, like the sound of distant thunder. "The balance has been shattered. Now you must face the consequences." The entities that emerged from the rift were not of this world. They seemed to exist outside of time and space, their very presence distorting reality. As Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss tried to communicate, the beings simply watched them in silence, their glowing eyes filled with an unreadable expression. "You have opened the door to the multiverse," one of them finally spoke. "And you have exposed your world to forces beyond your understanding." Dr. Hayes felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "We didn't know," he said. "We just wanted to learn. We didn't mean to. Intentions are irrelevant," the entity replied. "You have altered the course of existence, and now you will pay the price." The rift behind them began to shimmer once again, and Dr. Hayes realized with a sinking feeling that the consequences of their actions had only just begun. The rift had been closed, but its aftermath still lingered. Dr. Hayes stared at the lab's monitors, the readings growing more erratic by the day. The world felt fragile, as though it could unravel at any moment. Dr. Voss entered, her face grim. "The multiverse is still leaking into our world. The breach hasn't been fully sealed." Dr. Hayes clenched his jaw, determined. "We need to finish what we started, or everything we've worked for will be lost." They could no longer ignore the instability. The rift might have been closed, but it was clear now. The multiverse had left its mark, and the damage was just beginning. With every passing day, the rifts became harder to contain. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss worked tirelessly, but each effort to stabilize the energy readings seemed to push them closer to the edge. "We're running out of time," Dr. Voss said, fear creeping into her voice. Dr. Hayes looked at the instruments, knowing they were facing forces beyond their comprehension. "We have to stop it. We can't let this spiral any further." As the rift flared one final time, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss activated the containment system, but the energy was overwhelming. The lab shook, and the walls cracked. "It's not enough," Dr. Voss screamed, trying to hold the systems in place. "We need more power," Dr. Hayes shouted, his hands shaking as he pushed the system's limits. The room trembled, the rift pulsing with destructive force. Desperation filled the air as they fought to prevent the collapse of their reality. In a final desperate attempt, they overloaded the system, sending a surge of energy into the rift. The lab erupted in light, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. When the noise finally died down, the rift was gone, but the damage was done. The lab was in ruins, their bodies bruised and bloodied. But the rift was no more. They had succeeded, at great cost. Weeks later, the world outside seemed normal, but Dr. Hayes could never forget the cost. The rift was closed, but something remained. A message appeared on his screen one night. "This is just the beginning." He sat back in his chair, the weight of those words sinking in. The multiverse was far from finished with them. Months had passed since the rift's closure, but Dr. Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. He was back in the lab alone when he noticed it, anomalies in the data they had thought were stable. The rift was gone, but the energy fluctuations were still present. "It's not over," he whispered, realizing that the multiverse was still leaking into their world. Dr. Voss walked in just as he said it. "We have to act before it spreads," she said. Dr. Hayes nodded. "We didn't close it. Not really." The multiverse was far from done with them. After analyzing the data, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss realized they weren't the only ones who had opened rifts. The energy disturbances were spreading like cracks in the multiverse, each one feeding into the other. They couldn't ignore it anymore. "We need to find the other rifts," Dr. Hayes said, determination in his eyes. The knowledge they had gained came with a terrible price. The world they had saved was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The rifts were multiplying faster than they could track them. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss worked together to formulate a plan to stop them, but the technology they needed was unstable. "We can't close them all," Dr. Voss said, "but we can slow them down." They realized the only way to stop the multiverse from collapsing was to neutralize the energy feeding the rifts. But it wasn't just a scientific problem. They were racing against time, and every moment they waited, the rifts grew stronger. With their plan in place, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss activated the devices that would redirect the rift's energy, but the backlash was immediate. The lab shook violently, and the rift flared up, unstable and chaotic. "It's not enough," Dr. Voss yelled. Dr. Hayes realized they had miscalculated again. The rift was too strong. Desperation set in. "We can't stop it, but maybe we can contain it," he said. Together, they pushed the device to its limits, redirecting the energy once more, hoping it would be enough. Finally, with a blinding flash, the rift began to close. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Voss watched, breathless, as the light from the rift flickered one last time before fading completely. Silence. The rift was gone. But as they stood amidst the wreckage of the lab, they couldn't shake the feeling that the cost was too high. The world was safe, for now. But the knowledge they had gained came at a steep price. Dr. Hayes turned to Dr. Voss. "We've done what we could, but we'll never truly be free of this." Dr. Voss nodded, her expression grim. "The multiverse will always be there, watching."